Ed Sullivan stood backstage at CBS Studio 50, witnessing the most shocking confrontation he had ever seen between a performer and his own musicians. It was March 8, 1961, and Ray Charles was scheduled to perform on The Ed Sullivan Show in 30 minutes, when he delivered an ultimatum that would split his band down the middle and challenge everything Ed thought he knew about the music business. "I don't care if you've been with me for 10 years, Ray said to his all-white backup singers, his voice cold with determination. "If you can't share a stage with my black musicians as equals, then you can find another job. I'm not going to perform segregated music for integrated television anymore." 3 of his singers immediately walked off the stage, leaving Ray's performance in chaos and Ed wondering if he was about to witness the self-destruction of one of America's greatest musical talents for the sake of a principle that could destroy his career. Before you hear this explosive story, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to witness is how Ray Charles chose racial justice over commercial success and forever changed American entertainment. To understand why Ray Charles was willing to destroy his own band for the sake of racial integration, you need to understand what was happening in American music in March 1961, and how the civil rights movement was forcing every black performer to choose between financial success and personal dignity in ways that would define their legacy and character. Ray wasn't just another talented musician trying to make it in a racist industry. He was a revolutionary artist who had already broken down barriers by combining gospel, R&B, and country music in ways that challenged both musical and racial categories that had kept American culture artificially divided for generations. By 1961, Ray Charles had achieved something that seemed impossible for a black performer in segregated America: mainstream crossover success that made him wealthy and famous across racial lines while maintaining his artistic integrity and authentic voice. His hits like "Georgia on My Mind" and "Hit the Road Jack" were played on both black and white radio stations, and his concerts drew integrated audiences who came together to hear music that transcended traditional categories and challenged social conventions simply through the power of artistic excellence. But Ray's success had come at a price that was becoming increasingly difficult for him to accept as both his consciousness and the civil rights movement evolved. His touring band included both black and white musicians who worked together seamlessly on stage, creating magic through their musical collaboration. However, when they performed in the South, the white musicians stayed in different hotels, ate at different restaurants, and sometimes even performed on different stages to comply with segregation laws that treated his black musicians as second-class citizens despite their equal musical contributions. Ray had tolerated these degrading arrangements for years because they were the price of being able to perform at all in much of America, and because he had convinced himself that breaking down musical barriers would eventually lead to breaking down social barriers. But by 1961, his patience with these compromises was reaching a breaking point as the civil rights movement made it increasingly clear that gradual change was not sufficient, and that individuals with influence had a moral obligation to take stands that challenged systemic racism. Ray Charles is one of the most talented musicians I've ever worked with, Ed had told his wife Sylvia after Ray's previous Sullivan Show appearances. "But I can see that the racial tensions in his band and in the country are getting worse. The civil rights movement is forcing everyone to take sides, and Ray is being torn between keeping his band together and standing up for what he believes is right. He's reaching a point where he can't compartmentalize his success from the injustices his people face every day." Ed had noticed increasing tension during Ray's rehearsals over the past year that went beyond normal creative or professional conflicts. The black and white musicians in Ray's band worked well together musically, creating innovative arrangements that showcased Ray's genre-blending genius. But there was an underlying current of racial tension that became more apparent as the civil rights movement gained momentum and forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about American society. Ray himself had become more outspoken about racial issues, using his fame and success to challenge segregation in ways that made some of his white musicians uncomfortable and threatened the carefully maintained status quo that had allowed his integrated band to exist within a segregated society. The crisis had been building for months, but it had reached a breaking point during the band's tour of the South in February 1961. Ray had been increasingly frustrated by the segregated conditions his musicians were forced to endure, and he had begun demanding that venues treat all of his musicians equally or he wouldn't perform. This ultimatum had already cost him several lucrative bookings, but Ray seemed determined to prioritize dignity over financial gain. "I'm tired of watching my black musicians being treated like second-class citizens while I get treated like royalty because I make money for white promoters," Ray had told his management team during a heated meeting in early March. "These men are artists, professionals, and human beings who deserve the same respect that's automatically given to my white musicians. If venues can't treat them with basic human dignity, then I don't want to perform there anymore, no matter how much money we're leaving on the table." The ultimatum had created a crisis within Ray's organization that threatened to tear apart relationships that had been built over years of musical collaboration. His white backup singers, who had been with him for years and had helped create his distinctive sound, felt that Ray was putting politics ahead of music and their livelihoods. They argued that changing the arrangements that had allowed them to perform together successfully would destroy the band and hurt everyone financially, including the black musicians Ray claimed to be protecting. "Ray is making this about race when it should be about music," one of the white singers had complained to Ray's manager during a private meeting. "We've all worked together successfully for years, creating something beautiful that brings people joy. Why does he want to destroy that now just to make a political statement that's going to hurt everyone involved?" But for Ray, this wasn't about politics in the abstract sense. It was about basic human dignity, respect, and the fundamental principle that talent and character should matter more than skin color. He had reached a point where he could no longer compartmentalize his success from the systematic humiliation that his black musicians faced every day on tour, and where continuing to accept these conditions felt like a betrayal of everything he claimed to believe about music bringing people together. The March 8 confrontation had been triggered by Ray's decision to demand complete integration for his Sullivan show appearance, rejecting the usual compromise arrangements that had allowed him to perform on mainstream television while maintaining segregated practices behind the scenes. Instead of the usual arrangement where his musicians would be divided by race for publicity photos and backstage activities, Ray insisted that everyone be treated identically regardless of color. "From now on, my band is integrated completely or it doesn't exist at all," Ray had announced to his musicians during their pre-show meeting at CBS. "I'm not going to pretend anymore that separate can be equal. And I'm not going to ask my black musicians to accept degradation just so my white musicians can feel comfortable. Either we're all equal members of this band or I'll find musicians who understand that basic principle of human dignity." Ed watched in amazement and horror as Ray's announcement split his band down the middle. 3 of his white backup singers immediately announced they were quitting, unwilling to be part of what they saw as a political statement that would damage their own careers. "Ray, you're destroying everything we've built together," one of the departing singers said angrily. "This isn't about music anymore. This is about you trying to prove a point that's going to hurt everyone." But Ray was unmoved by their threats and arguments. "Music has always been about more than just entertainment," he replied with quiet intensity. "It's about expressing truth, and the truth is that segregation is wrong and I won't be part of it anymore, even if it costs me everything I've worked for." Ed realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in American entertainment. A successful black performer choosing principle over profit, even when that choice could destroy his career. Ray was risking his most successful musical partnership to make a statement about racial equality that went far beyond the entertainment industry. "Ray," Ed said, approaching the musician as his white singers gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, "are you sure you want to do this? These singers have been essential to your sound. Losing them could change everything about your music." Ray turned toward Ed's voice with the intense focus that had made him such a powerful performer despite his blindness. "Mr. Sullivan, my music has always been about bringing different traditions together. Gospel, blues, country, R&B. But I can't bring musical traditions together while accepting that the people who create that music should be kept apart. It doesn't make sense artistically, and it doesn't make sense morally." Ed was moved by Ray's conviction, but he was also concerned about the immediate practical consequences. "Ray, you're supposed to perform in 25 minutes. How are you going to replace 3 singers on such short notice?" Ray smiled, and for the first time that evening he seemed completely confident and relaxed. "Mr. Sullivan, I've been performing music my whole life, and the one thing I've learned is that real music comes from the heart, not from arrangements or contracts. My remaining musicians and I will give you a performance that's true to what music should be. A celebration of what happens when different people come together to create something beautiful. The performance that followed became legendary in both television and civil rights history. Ray Charles performed with his remaining integrated band, delivering a version of Georgia on My Mind that was both musically brilliant and politically revolutionary. The absence of his white backup singers was hardly noticeable because the performance carried an emotional weight and authenticity that transcended any technical considerations. Ed introduced Ray with unusual solemnity, seeming to understand the historical significance of what was happening. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome an artist who represents the very best of American music, Mr. Ray Charles. The studio audience responded with enthusiasm, but many viewers at home didn't realize they were witnessing a quiet revolution in American entertainment. Ray's decision to prioritize racial integration over musical tradition was setting a precedent that would influence performers for generations. After the performance, Ray sought out Ed to thank him for supporting his decision. "Mr. Sullivan, I know what I did tonight was risky, and I appreciate you standing by me even when it created problems for your show." Ed shook Ray's hand with genuine respect. "Ray, what you did tonight took real courage. You chose to do what was right even when it cost you personally and professionally. That's the kind of integrity that makes great art and great people." The response to Ray's Sullivan Show performance and his band integration was immediate and polarizing. Some critics praised him for taking a principled stand for civil rights, while others accused him of destroying a successful musical partnership for political reasons. But the most significant response came from other black performers who were inspired by Ray's example. His willingness to risk his career for racial integration encouraged other musicians to make similar demands and helped accelerate the integration of American entertainment. Ray Charles showed all of us that success means nothing if it requires you to accept degradation and humiliation, said Sam Cooke in response to Ray's actions. He proved that we can demand dignity and respect even when it costs us financially. Ray's decision to integrate his band completely led to temporary financial losses and the need to rebuild his musical arrangements, but it ultimately strengthened both his artistic integrity and his long-term career. He recruited new musicians who shared his vision of integrated performance, and his music became even more powerful and authentic. Ed Sullivan's support for Ray's integration decision became part of the broader story of how television helped advance civil rights by giving black performers platforms to express their dignity and demand equal treatment. The March 8, 1961 Sullivan Show performance marked a turning point in American entertainment, representing the moment when a major black performer chose racial justice over commercial considerations and proved that artistic integrity and social progress could go hand in hand. Ray's willingness to destroy his own band rather than continue accepting segregation became an inspiration for the civil rights movement and a model for how individuals could use their success and influence to challenge systemic racism. If this story of courage and moral conviction moved you, hit that subscribe button and tell us, would you be willing to sacrifice professional success to stand up for your principles? Sometimes the most important thing an artist can do is refuse to compromise on basic human dignity, even when that choice comes with serious personal and financial costs.